much, Davor, and it's really pleased to be here. I think I really love Croatia, also coming every year to the seaside, and I know the most important words in Croatian, Modric, Rakitic, and all the other words, so we learned it a lot. So actually I am, as Davor said, a medical doctor, a physician, but I realized in the last couple of years that nowadays it's not easy to be a physician because you need to be a top scientist to be a good clinician. What does it mean? Actually, if you look whole of the world, now it's run by science and technology. You cannot be good in any field without science and technology. If you look at about the cars, in the past 30 years ago we had a car and it was one repairing service guy who could repair the car. Nowadays, if you have a problem with your cars, there are several services you need to take. Also in the past, when you moved to other town, what you needed to go somewhere, you needed a map and the local person who could tell me which way is the best to go. If somebody now lives, for example, in a town you've never been, and he has 40 years experience of traveling in the town, which way to go, but doesn't have this scientific achievement about this GPS. You go on the very first time to this town, which shows you where are the traffics, and you will be at a point earlier than somebody who were there 40 years in their life and living there. So without science, you don't even go around. Concerning the sport activity, around 30-40 years, somebody could be an Olympic winner without any science. Nowadays, for one sports guy, has at least 10-15 specialists around him concerning nutrition, concerning sports, concerning somebody measure the pulse rate, and all the others. So you need scientific activity everywhere in the world. And medicine is exactly the same. There is a big change in the medical paradigm concerning the last period. If we look at about the 20th century, scientists come from a good clinical practice. So first, you had the quality patient's care, and science was a hobby of good clinicians. However, it's now changed. Science is a basis. You cannot have a country, cannot have a good healthcare system without science. So science changed, and now science must be actually on the base. You need to understand, and it's sometimes people surprised when I put like 2040. If you know about the evolution of things from behind you in the future, and you can plan enough your future, and I am so happy that so many young people here, because 2040 you would like to be a doctor, you need to understand what kind of skills, what kind of knowledge you need to gain to be a good doctor in 2040. But first, before we look at the evolution of what we will have in 2040, let's understand what was before 2000s. In the last century, the science was everyone wanted to know how the body works. So the basic science developed a lot, and clinical science was not really existed. So doctors could treat the patients based on their own experience. So the system was that there were the professors or the key doctors, and all of them saw, for example, a group of patients only and their experiences. Some of them were in a low volume centers, some of them were in a high volume centers. But of course, because they see totally different population and they had totally different knowledge about the diseases, they think differently, all these doctors teach differently, and of course they choose a treatments differently for the patients. So in this area of medicine, what the residents needed to do? Residents need to learn who likes what. This consultant likes giving antibiotics, this don't like. This doctor would like to make an operation, this, oh no, it's a stupid, it doesn't need to do the operation. So in the past, actually the residents needed to learn which consultant is the better. So, and what will happen with the patients? If the patients coming from a part of the expertise of the professors, they are unlucky. However, if the patient's coming from this path, the patient was lucky. So this was the general medicine. They said you can be a good doctor only if you spend more amount of time with the patients. And if you go to make a PhD, you never will be a good doctor because you spend your time on a table and not next to the patients. That was right. However, if you look at about this curve, about this kind of expertise cover only a small amount of persons because, for example, in Hungary there are 5,000 patients suffering from acute pancreatitis. In my center, we'll see 300 acute pancreatitic patients annually, which is really a lot because we cover all the area, but it's still less than 10% of the whole population. So my knowledge will be definitely limited. Doesn't matter how many patients I can see. So what changed? Because a patient suffering from acute pancreatitis is exactly the same disease. Doesn't matter I treat these patients, Davos treat these patients, anybody treat the patient's exactly the same and the disease exactly the same. So the new model, which came from plenty of clinical trials, they said that the professors need to make the evidences, need to run plenty of clinical trials, plenty of data analysis to get a common knowledge about the disease. Because it's not the one which is in my brain with a small amount of patients. It's needed to have real evidences, what treatment is good and what not. And I was happy to hear that you just finished an evidence-based courses about this. So this can cover much more patients than the local experience, and in that case the doctors will think exactly the same. So it doesn't matter I go to visit the patients today and next day you go and the third day you go to see the patients, because we think exactly the same from the diseases, we teach the same, we have exactly the same slides, and we treat the patients on absolutely the same way. So let's look at how the residents, what they need to do. They need to learn the evidence-based guidelines. What to do, when to start the antibiotics, when to discharge the patients, when to start the oral feeding on the patients. And of course here the more patients will be lucky because the evidence is covering more patients in the system. But of course the individual experience cannot be omitted because of course there are a couple of patients which not inside the evidence. So in that case the professor's experience is necessary. However, this model covers only 80% of the patients. Still there are white points, and not only the white points we had, because every patient had different comorbidities, every patient has different ages, so there are lots of other factors which need to be settled. So how to deal with the individual persons? Very easy. This needs to be changed to a patient's personalized medicine. What does it mean? You need to pick up the patients, you need to understand about what's going on, about the patient's pharmacogenetics, about what the patient's comorbidities. So it means the pharmacogenetics, artificial intelligence coming to the light when you upload data to the system and you teach the computer about to see plenty of things. And of course there are plenty of parts when you need to take a sample from the patients, make an organoid, test the drugs, and go back to the patients. For example, the cystic fibrosis. Now if you go to the States, they take a rectum biopsy, build up the organoid, they test the Orkambi and other CFTR potentiator and correctors, and after which verse to the patients, after the third day they give to the patients. So medicine is moving, and if I look at actually in the past, it was definitely a medicine-based science. So medicine was first, science second, but it's actually changed. And at the present, the best model is the evidence-based medicine. And however, in the future, there will be definitely the personalized medicine. So if I would like to understand what I need, what kind of skills I need in the future of medicine, to knowledge in science. You need to understand scientific results to apply it in healthcare. So currently, in the 21st century, what is the best model for clinical practice? There should be like units where the patient's going and the expert people can see this kind of patients. So for example, all acute pancreatitis patients should come to one ward. All IBD patients should go to the other ward. So these kind of patients should be seen by the real expertise of the field. So for example, internal medicine, surgery, these kind of subjects are good for undergraduate teaching and to understand medicine. But in treatment, it's not good, because if I see only 5 acute pancreatitis patients a year, I cannot handle the patients if there are no evidences to treat the patients. So the best model is to centralize patients' care for one disease. The residents need to learn about the evidences. They need to apply the evidences. In that case, the professor has only supervising period, because if you learn when to start the antibiotics in patients suffering from acute pancreatitis, I know the same. You know the same because we learn the evidences. However, if a patient's coming, for example, now we had the patients with acute pancreatitis patients with Wirsung rupture, and it was a very difficult cases, and the evidence-based guideline doesn't write down anything about what to do with these patients. In that case, of course, I saw more than 1,000 acute pancreatitis patients within a year. Of course, I will be the one who has the biggest experience in the field. This kind of thinking, plenty of times attacked by older doctors. They say, come on, you will be only good doctor if you spend more times on the field and you make the decisions next to the patient's bed, because each patients are different, so on. Of course, you can measure it. We measured it actually in the field of acute pancreatitis. We looked at 28 different hospitals in Hungary, and we looked at 600 patients within a 2 years period. And we watched a very easy thing. We checked whether they keep the evidence-based guidelines or not. For example, now it's clearly in the guideline that if a pancreatitis patient is coming, an early aggressive fluid resuscitation should be done. This is approximately 5 to 10 milliliters per hour per body weight kilograms. This results around 3-4 liters of fluid in the first day, or sometimes even more. So we checked whether some people saying giving less or more fluid. Those centers who used an individual experience, so they didn't follow the guideline, the mortality was 3.8%. Those who gave the really what is the guideline and they performed this kind of fluid secretion, it was 1.5%. The rate of severe pancreatitis is also a big primary endpoint in pancreatology. The rate of severe pancreatitis for those patients who didn't get the aggressive fluid therapy was 80%. Those who got on the ER unit, the early aggressive fluid secretion was 11%. For example, enteral feeding in severe pancreatitis is compulsory, but those centers who didn't start it in time, the enteral feeding, the mortality was 47%, and those who didn't start it was 21%. So generally, if I look at the whole system, doesn't matter which disease I will check, evidence-based therapy for a group of patients will always generate better healthcare without actually this. If I look at in a country like Hungary, we have 10 million patients, and we have, based on the National Insurance Company data, 5,000 patients suffering from acute pancreatitis. One severe pancreatitis costs approximately 6,000 euros. This is only the consumables and drugs you give, not the hotels. They are in the units 50, 60, 80 days with plenty of intensive care therapy, sometimes operations. Mild pancreatitis patients go home after 4 or 5 days. And the cost difference are here. Theoretically, unfortunately now in Hungary, quality care is not included in the insurance company plan. They cover the patients based on the volume of the center. Either you use the evidence-based therapy or not. For example, in Hungary, the health system would change, and they will say to a hospital that we only cover the patient's cost. If you keep the evidence-based therapy, for example, here we could decrease the rate of severe pancreatitis with 6.9%, And we also could change the mortality with 2.3%. If I look at the numbers, this would save 2 million euros annually, plus 116 survivors annually. And we are speaking in a disease which has a low incidence rate. First, people can be shocked about this number, but when we look at the total numbers for the country, it's even worse. So currently, and this is not only a problem in Croatia but Hungary, we don't use the scientific knowledge in healthcare system. In Western part they are using better, but in Eastern part they are using in a lower quality. So currently in Europe we don't use whatever knowledge we have. What does it mean? This is the data of the Hungarian country, but you can have the data from the, it must be available at the EU statistics from Luxembourg, you can get it. But in Hungary, for example, 2016, there were 129,000 people died. However, if we look at the prevention, nearly 30,000 deaths could have been avoided by prevention. It's a lot of number. However, if I count about the quality and effectiveness of the healthcare, additional 16,000 deaths could have been avoided. And if I look at other issues, like for example, the major healthcare problems like alcohol, cigarette, low amount of movement, and BMI, it means around 60,000 deaths could have been avoided. 60,000 in a country. It's a big town. If I look at the European data, and of course you can say that if somebody is 80, 90 years old, yes, they die, that's okay. But if I look at the number of deaths below 75 years in Europe, 1.7 million people die annually in Europe below 75 years. And based on the statistical data, 1.2 could have been avoided. So from 3 persons, we could save 2. However, in those countries where the scientific activity higher, this rate is lower. Like, for example, in France and Croatia, this amount is 60%. But, for example, here is Croatia, Romania, Lithuania, Hungary, Latvia, 80%. What does it mean? From 5 deaths under 75, 4 could have been saved if we use the currently available knowledge in science. So this is a big problem, and this is not surprising that the Academy of Europe also put translational medicine on an absolutely top priority. Because what does it mean? We have plenty of knowledge. We have already plenty of available knowledge in basic science, clinical science, and applied science. And it's definitely an unmet need to translate it to healthcare. It's including prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up for the patients. Okay, this is not in 2020 when people realized its importance, so we must understand the evolution of translational medicine. This came actually from the part of basic scientists, because they realized that the politicians and people wanted to know what the science will come to the healthcare to the population, and they always wanted to get the knowledge about, yes, we need some information how the results can be translated to healthcare system. So basic scientists made this term, this bench to the bedside. Most probably you have heard this kind of terms, because they said that the biggest problem that the basic and clinical science diverge from each other, and yes it is, it's a problem, because if you finish the medical school, some doctors go to the department of anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and never see patients in their whole entire life. The other group of people go to the clinic to be a resident and going on and never deal about science any longer, which is not good. But they made this word that delivered by basic scientists, this bench to the bedside model. What did it mean in the life? First of all, for example, if a basic scientist applied for a grant, for example, like in an MRC, they needed to put there what will be the outcome actually of the disease. If I go further, for example, one of the most distinguished journals in physiology is the Journal of Physiology. For example, you need to write a translational perspective, what this brings to the light. So basic scientists went further. I was, for example, a postdoc at the University of Liverpool from 2006 to 2008. When I moved there, the department was called Department of Physiology. Later on, the institute was renamed to Institute for Translational Medicine, but the same people did the same issues, but they won more grants because translational medicine is more attractive for people to give money than Institute for Translation, than Department of Physiology. But if I look at realistically, the number, as I saw, 4 people could have been avoided for deaths of 5. In 1950, 85,000 articles were published in PubMed. Last year, it was 1.4 million articles were published. And if you look at the benefits for the healthcare, it's really not coming back. So a new model of thinking of translational medicine is crucially needed, because somehow all the basic discoveries are on the shelves, and all discoveries waiting for discovery of their usefulness actually in the whole system. However, why is it not work? And why does it not working, especially in Eastern and Central Europe? What are the problems? Some of the problems are existed also in the Western part. Some problems are only in the Eastern part. About Western part, if I look at the undergraduates teaching on the medical education, for example, we have plenty of subjects in basic science. Also, we have pharmacology. They teach them. However, concerning the newest clinical methodologies, meta-analysis, network meta-analysis, adaptive clinical trials, randomized double-blind clinical trials, crossover trials, so all the methodology which is currently in the medical field, it's not taught at all. And this is not only actually in this part of Europe, unfortunately, in the Western part as well. Also, science is not taking seriously into account. If I look at one of the Hungarian universities postdoctoral school, we will see the results. Generally, there are around 2-3 times more clinicians, hospital doctors, than basic scientists. Not surprising that, for example, if I look at the journals impact factors, the clinical journals impact factor are higher than the basics one. So, for example, the New England Journal of Medicine impact factor around 80, JAMA Lancet is around 50. However, for example, Science and Nature, which are really excellent journals, around 36-40. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that New England Journal of Medicine is a better journal than Nature or Science. One of them is a top quality in clinics, the other is in basic science, but this means actually that those fields where more people works and more people cites, the impact factor is higher than in basic parts. So theoretically, this should suggest that in a clinical part, 2 or 3 times more PhD degrees should be awarded, and more PhD students should be than in a basic part. However, if I look at, this is one of the Hungarian universities of data, we looked at for 5 years all the PhDs. Within 5 years, it was 188 PhD awarded. If I look at from the clinical institutions, there were 99 PhDs. From the theoretical department, like physiology, it was 80. So it seems about 50-50%. So it would suggest generally that although it's not 2-3 times higher, but clinical science all right. However, if we look at each PhD separately, we could see that those people who coming from a theoretical institution, they do their PhD in a basic science. However, those persons who are working in a clinic and get a PhD, 50% of them doing the PhD in a basic lab, going back to the medical school, do the PhD, and coming back to the clinic. So unfortunately, it's still the clinical science very much on the basic. So although it should be 3 times more clinical PhD, currently 3 times less clinical PhD. And if we analyze all the articles, especially published in this PhD, there are 400 basic science articles and only 130 clinical articles. So within 5 years period, in this university, approximately 1,000 clinical science papers missing. So clinical science is absolutely underdeveloped in eastern and central part of the Europe. Why? If you go to work in a Western university, the major issue is your scientific background. If you publish good papers, you get a faculty position in Cambridge, Oxford, Heidelberg, Göttingen. Everywhere, your scientific output is the key point. Unfortunately, this part of Europe, this is like a hobby. If you do science, that's all right. If you don't do science, but you have good excuses, that I see patients, so I can do science, I teach a lot, I can do science, it's enough. So 0 point is enough with excuses and don't need a paper. So I looked at 1 year impact factor journals, first and last authorships at our university. So and any kind of impact factor were counted. So even the impact of the journal was 0.008. It was still counted. There are 472 like lecturers, readers, associate professors are there in the university, and we looked at 1 year data. 75% of the academic people have no papers at all in an impact factors first or last authorship journals. And if you look at only ones who perform, it's very limited. But no problem, because we have like those people who are like research associate, researchers, postgraduate students, which don't need to treat the patients, they don't need to teach. So we expected that the performance of publishing is much higher if you only research associates. Unfortunately, it was not the case. From 260 people, 81% has 0 first or last authorships. So when we went to the hospital stage, of course in hospitals, it's not science were in the past not as expected as earlier. In a hospital-based, 96% of the doctors have no publications, first or last authorship in an impact factor journals. Never mind, this was only 1 year. Most probably they published a year before, or they published a year later. So we looked at a 4 years period of this, but unfortunately we must have realized that those people who don't publish last year, we don't publish this year, and they will not publishing a year later. So unfortunately, in the medical school, 50% of them don't do any kind of activity in science, and in the hospital level, 95% don't do that. So this is a special problem in Eastern and Central Europe, and if we don't change it, the healthcare will not really improve. However, as I said, these analyses were out of quality. In clinical science, there are lots of quality. If the trial is registered, the trial, what does it mean? It's a higher quality. If you have a sample size calculation before you start the trial, this is a quality. More patients, of course it's a quality. Data from 50 patients different than data from 5,000 patients. Multicentricity, also it's a big point, because if you have more centers, they work. And also if you use several methodologies, also helpful. So let's look at again the data from the university earlier. We had 53 trials in the PhD degrees. Only 3.6% were actually registered, so only 2. Never mind, let's look at the sample size calculation. None of them had sample size calculation. This is usual. Let's look at 50-50 patients from 2 groups and do the study. Look at 100 and do the study. If we look at about the number of cases, most of them had less than 50 patients. Only very rarely had more than 500 patients. If I look at the methodology, retrospective data analysis and cross-sectional questionnaires, but no real new kind of methodology in science. And if I look at the centers, only 11% had at least 2 centers. So what does it mean? What is the real thinking? These are mine patients. these are mine data, I don't share with anyone. The only study, if some young people coming, look at my results in the last 10 years, and we will write a paper as a retrospective analysis, and that's it. I don't want to collaborate with you because you will steal my data. It's my career, I want to be better than you. So the whole system actually going to the really, really bad side. So until we will not change this, there will be actually no benefits. This is a table, we analyzed the publications in the last 50 years in pancreatology. We looked at more than 20,000 papers. If you look at Eastern and Central Europe, the activity is much less actually than in Western Europe. In Hungary, in the last 10 years, we did a lot in the pancreatic research, but it's really going down the activity in the field. If I look at the registered clinical trials, exactly the same. There is still the iron court is there, but not on the walls, but theoretically, if you look at about the clinical trials in the countries involved, is less. Actually, the way why we could do something better in the healthcare for patients, that we did better activity. So what are the other difficulties? The other difficulties is about the separation of the doctors and the medical schools. So if we look at about the department of pathophysiology, pathology, and all the others, and the clinical units, they are separated from each other. So they totally work separately. If you look at the interdisciplinary unit, exactly the same. Usually there are no biostatisticians, usually there are no IT specialists, what to do with the GDPR, how to deal with it, about the social media, all the others. So this is the current situation. I think the same in Hungary and the same in Croatia as well. Also, it's not good funded because currently, as I showed you on the picture, all research committee makes enough to write down that what will change. I read plenty of grant applications. Cancer will be done. No more patients will die, everything. But no, and everyone would like to see papers. But nobody put as an indicator at the end of the study what will end it next to the healthcare, next to the patient side. So one of the bigger problem, and this is the same in Europe, at the ERC, that currently no available funding, in which they say, you start this research, but after 4 years, I would like to say a shorter length of hospitalization, less mortality in the disease. All of them expect the fact that if you publish the paper, actually that's enough. However, what is the biggest problem? Especially in Hungary, the biggest problem is a we call white coat hierarchy. When about from the eminence-based medicine, the professors are the gods, and when a visit starts, good morning, professor, hi, son, and the conversation starting about that way, it cannot be actually a good healthcare because each of the persons need to run the system differently. And the other issue is, I heard plenty of times, come on, we have been doing it for 20, 30 years, why to change? My patients are all right, I know it better. So in the 21st century, the biggest skill is to change yourself. So today maybe this was the best practice, but maybe tomorrow it will be not anything else. So you must be able to change your clinical ways together. So not surprising that in Academia of Europea, which is an integrated Academia of Europe, they have approximately 5,000 members, and 73 of them actually Nobel laureates. So it's a quite intensive knowledge is there. They are actually the advisor of the European Union. They also would like to have a big change because you saw the number in Europe. And we were so lucky at the University of Pécs because the proposal we suggested about a new model of translational medicine were accepted. And last year there were plenty of top experts for 1 year and discussed the topics, for example, including the chief editor of Nature Medicine, Science Translational Medicine, and all of this. And the new model is in translational medicine that the question always needs to be asked next to the patient's care. So translational medicine is not from bench to the bedside. The question is that the patients next to the healthcare. After, if you don't know the answer, you need to do high quality research. After the high quality research, you need to put it to the knowledge publications. What does it mean, knowledge publication? Evidence-based guidelines, systematic reviews, protocols. However, it's still not enough. You need to send it for healthcare professionals, for patients, and so on. I don't know the situation in Croatia, but for example, in Hungary, less than 5% of evidence-based guidelines available in English, translated only to Hungarian. They are not published in our language. So how can we implement the newest scientific data in hospitals if this knowledge is still not available actually in their own language? And of course, also in Hungary, especially the older doctors, they have limited knowledge. So here is a short video about the summary of the Academy of Europea workshop. And for example, there are a couple of key experts. For example, Ole Petersen, he is also a pancreatologist. He published more than 10 papers in Nature, Cell, and so on. Or Stephen Holgate, whose Hirsch index is 167, and his citation is more than 100,000. They are now leading this field. And there is a short video about to understand what the Academy of Europea think about now in translational medicine.
Researchers commissioned by the Academia Europea gathered in September 2019 at the impressive headquarters of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in Budapest to respond to problems in the field of translational medicine, or TM. TM seeks to bring findings from basic and clinical research, indeed from a wide range of research findings, to patient care as quickly as possible. This figure illustrates the main areas of TM and the way the TM cycle is implemented. Questions raised in healthcare can only be answered in multidisciplinary working groups and published for colleagues, laypeople, decision makers, and our partners in industry, so that these answers are turned into practice that facilitates patient care. Since the 2000s, the TM approach has developed a great deal, but various problems have also emerged which slow the spread of the process. For example, the problem of defining TM, of financing the various programs, and of the lack of TM centers, as well as communication problems between the various levels. An official advisory body to the European Union, the Academia Europea launched a one-year project in 2018 to develop a model to make it faster and easier to put scientific findings to good use in society.
One of the biggest center for translational medicine is in Hungary at the University of Pécs, and we are really very proud that the Academy of Europea gave us the leadership in this project. Everything together.
The model was developed by researchers in basic and clinical science, media specialists, university leaders, heads of TM centers, and others. The new model they created is expected to be of great use in improving translational medicine.
The whole aim of the project is to shorten the time between discoveries and treatments of patients. If we can do that, then it will be obviously to the benefit of the patient, because they will more quickly get better treatments, but it will also save a lot of money for society.
The center, ENGAGE, plays a key role in developing translational medicine in Hungary and internationally.
I think the main thing now is not so much to change that, because that is a good model. It's similar to other ones with nurses and statisticians and doctors, technicians in it, but to make sure it's properly funded, because this needs funding. You cannot have busy clinicians trying to run all of this as well as delivering a clinical service. So it will need dedicated funding, either from government or charity, or maybe even from commercial sectors.
The TM Center ENGAGE has developed and now operates a new training system which promotes a new approach and way of thinking among medical students, doctoral candidates, and residents alike.
One of my colleagues and myself are attending a 12-month resident fellowship program. We started to work in international institute for pediatrics, which is about to show us
So then the question is, what is the model? And of course, plenty of times you can say that you are in a country which doesn't work well. However, we could actually, within 4 years, we started almost from zero. So it doesn't matter where you are at the stage, you can implement it very quickly. So what we have done, first, when I was originally at the University of Szeged until 2015, I started to put together the whole project from a Hungarian Academy of Sciences grant. However, after, for example, the University of Szeged were not very keen to change to this model. So, however, at the University of Pécs recruited me and offered these new systems. And in 2016, the whole system started a 200,000 euros grant, which is not really a huge amount of money even from our countries. Within a very short period, we could win 2 good European grants to continue the system, and now currently the system running. So first, somebody needs to put money in it. This is very important. What we needed, in 1st of January, we established this center, and we started this model from healthcare, science, knowledge, actually, and communication. And the first, which is very important, and I had an excellent meeting also with the rectors and the other leaders of the university to establish interdisciplinary unit. You cannot do everything. In 30 years ago, if you do an experiment, you put the data to an Excel sheet, you put an ANOVA biostatistics Dexit, and it was enough. No, it's not enough. We have data from more than 20 countries, 3 million variables from the patients. You need IT biostatistics unit. Currently also, because this is not taught, this kind of new methodologies, we have a really very young faculty, even they are PhD students who teach this kind of clinical trial methodology. We have 5 biostatisticians, 3 informatics, 15 data managers who check the quality of the data, because not only the amount of the data important, because if one administrator put the hematocrit like 44%, the other 0.44, the biostatisticians will say that the average hematocrit is 22% for the patients. So you need to have uniform data quality in the system. So what we could achieve actually in the healthcare, in the general hospital level, we have usually nurses, we have consultants, and we have residents. This is how the whole healthcare system running. But this is not efficient because they fully time working on the patients. So now we have actually patients coordinator in the system. We have data manager and PhD students who run the different clinical trials. So first you need many young people to be a PhD students in the whole system. So this is like a morning visit in my unit. Of course, there are the consultants, we have the residents and the nurses, but we have the PhD students. For example, they are sharing a phone. We have a pancreatitis hotline there, so if a patient's coming to the ER unit, the PhD students coming in, he has the best knowledge in the treatment and everything, and the consultant who is there, the PhD students help about how to involve them to clinical trials and the different mechanisms, and we have after data managers who upload the data to the electronic clinical research form. And of course, what is the major issue, for example, in the unit, about we use the evidence-based knowledge, we use the treatment only, which is necessary for the patients. And of course, we try to do as many as high quality research actually we can. It's a very good question whether, okay, it can go in a university area, but can it be run also in the hospital level? Yes. Currently, we are running more than 30 registries, including neuroscience, including gastroenterology, cardiology, and others. We started in Pécs. We got the grant for the other 2 universities, but we tested 2 hospitals. One of them was the Székesfehérvár County Hospital and the Children's Hospital. And now, for example, we sent 1 PhD student and 2 clinical data administrators to Székesfehérvár, and they have already uploaded more than 600 patients' data to the registry and more than 100 data to clinical trials. The same in the Heimpál Hospital, and all the other university now started uploading the patient's data to the clinical trials. So the system can run even in a county hospitals. And the major issue is, and this is a big difference between general basic science and the translational medical science, that it's immediately coming to patients' benefits. We just finished a trial in which also the Rijeka Center was involved. For example, pancreatitis. As I said, the question needs to ask at healthcare. So what is the major etiology factor of pancreatitis? Alcohol and gallstones, yes? Is this an infectional disease, pancreatitis? No. Do you know the rate of antibiotics used in pancreatic patients? 80%. Come on. Very simple question. How can be used 80% of antibiotics in a disease which is not an infectional disease? Very simple question. So we did a big analysis. We involved 10,000 patients, not 50, 10,000 patients from 62 centers. One of them was from Rijeka, from 23 countries. And we found out that the biggest misleading factors are the CRP and leukocyte level elevating very quickly in the first rate. So neither of the absolute value of CRP, even if it's 400, doesn't deal anything with the infection, and the doctor start the antibiotics on the first 2 days. So based on all results, we could have in a knowledge publication 4 guidelines which saying everything, and now we could reduce to 35% the usage of antibiotics. With one study, you could reduce the antibiotics on a patient side. One question, one science, one knowledge, and coming back to the patient's care. The other issue is about the enteral feeding in pancreatitis. We also did a study that plenty of times patients don't get the enteral feeding in time, and there is a scientifically proved that either nasogastric feeding and nasojejunal feeding can be applied in pancreatitis. It was logical that go under the pancreas with the nasojejunal feeding, but all scientific results showed that no difference. So for example, in PAGE now we start all pancreatic patients with 50 milliliters an hour nasogastric feeding, and we only change it to nasojejunal if the patients do not tolerate the nasogastric feeding. We check the retention rate after 6 hours. And we could reduce the mortality to 1/3 about one we had in the past. And of course, the healthcare can be cheaper with 25% of these patients because they spend less amount of time in the hospital. We use less amount of antibiotics. Think about how much money is spent in a Croatian healthcare. In all subjects, if you would decrease with 25% the hospital cost, how much would it seem? And very importantly, as I mentioned, this can change about the healthcare cost. However, you can change it only if you have good scientific data and you use science. So science equals more efficient and better amount of money in healthcare. And we tested also in a hospital. We went, 1 PhD students, 2 administrators, went to the Székesfehérvár hospitals. Within a year, we decreased the length of hospitalization for patients suffering from pancreatitis with 164 days. And we could reduce the antibiotics with 31%. One disease, science taken to hospital level, change immediately the days of patients' hospitalization and antibiotics. We were also very happy that we not only were involved in scientific healthcare system, but also published really huge amount of papers about starting from basic science to clinical trials. So here is our activity in the last period. When we established the Center for Translational Medicine, I took over the Department of Pathophysiology. We published 4 to 7 papers a year. Within 4 years, last year, we published 73 articles, including high-quality impact journals. So within 3.5 years, we published 150 papers with high impact. 1/3 came from basic science, 1/3 with several different clinical methodology, and 1/3 from meta-analysis, which are already reanalyzing of other published data. So within 4 years, from the bottom, changing the paradigm, we could go actually up. We also started to be involved very much about in knowledge publication. So if I look at now, currently we are involved in all kind of evidence-based guidelines in pancreatology, and especially, for example, in pediatric pancreatitis, we were the one who actually put together the evidence-based therapy. However, this is the mostly neglected part, the communication. Because if I look at, for example, a postgraduate course, very rarely coming about the real evidences. The doctors usually telling what they believe and not the evidences. Everyone has different slides. We changed it in pancreatology. Now we have exactly the same slideshow for all diseases. Doesn't matter which experts going to give presentation on pancreatitis or pancreatic cancer. We have the same slideshow. We translated all available guideline in pancreatology to Hungarian, and we have also e-learning for medical doctors in Hungarian as well. However, the other thing is only the medical healthcare professional needs education? No. It was a surprising disease. I always start my grant applications that acute pancreatitis has no specific treatment. Neither to avoid pancreatitis you cannot do anything, but this is false. The Finnish study group published a randomized clinical trial about an intervention in which they could reduce the rate of recurrent pancreatitis by 2/3. If I had this kind of drug, I would be billionaire because everyone would buy it. But this is not a drug. This is a patient's education. Half an hour patient's education in every 3 months, even for alcoholics, can make them understood about what to do, and they could reduce 2/3 the rate of pancreatitis. In Hungary, every doctors are running, no time to deal with the patients. We had no specialist, for example, who deal with them. Now we started to make videos for the patients, and by the time they are lying on the bed, in the hospitals, they watch about educational videos concerning their diseases. And we developed a new education system for young people, and especially because these kind of knowledges are not available. So somebody who's starting in our unit from 1st of September, we have now on 6 months, 12 months, 24 months program. In the first 3 months, we teach all kind of methodology, which is not in the system. And after they sit down with an expert, methodology expert, and by the time of the 1 year, they already have a good first authorship paper in a good clinical journal within 1 year. And in Hungary, plenty of universities make excuses that all doctors running to abroad, they are going to western part of the Europe, but this is not really true. For example, we just started this new education system, and immediately 20 young Hungarian medical doctors joined in, and not only those who just finished medicine. For example, the lady you heard there, she already started their residency, stopped it, and for 1 year came to our center to learn all of this thing, and now going back to his institution and finishing the whole story. We also make publications for politicians, and just very good example what translational medicine means. When do we need to do the cholecystectomy after mild biliary acute pancreatitis? What the surgeon said before, yes, do it in an elective way. You had a pancreatitis, go home, make a rest, and after 3 months, come back, you had an elective date, and your cholecyst will be removed. Yes, but this was logical, but not true. The Dutch pancreatitis study group did a trial about the rate of recidive acute pancreatitis, and if you remove the pancreas, the cholecyst, right at the last day before discharge of the patients, so the patients are 4 days in pancreatitis, and the last day you remove it and send it home, you can reduce about 5 times the rate of recurrency. So if you don't remove the rate almost 10%, if you remove it's 2%. So what does it mean? It means that, for example, in Hungary, where we have 5,000 acute pancreatitis and around 1,500 cholecystectomy is done, If you do it on admission, you would have only 30 recurrence. If you do it in an elective way, the recurrence is 136. If I just count the hospital money spent on this 100 acute pancreatitis, it's 140,000 euros, not including, for example, the insulin therapy, about diabetes and everything. Exactly the same cost if you take the cholecystectomy right on the way or 3 months later. But what a big change if you use this scientific knowledge. And unfortunately, for example, I don't know, because Hungary also struggling with surgeons, although this knowledge has been implemented to the evidence-based guidelines, 5 years, it's not working in reality. I don't know whether the situation here, not working. How much money going away because we don't use this kind of scientific knowledge. So actually, how you can make this system work. So this was the old structure, as I mentioned, that this didn't work at all. So this is where we are currently. So what is the solution? If you look at who parts of the part, you can see that there is a solution. So what the student has, they don't have clinical knowledge, they don't have methodology knowledge, but they have time. The student is motivated, they have dedicated time. So what the clinician has, they have knowledge in clinics, however, they don't have time, because no, you are expected to work 40 hours a week. You can do science as a hobby between midnight and 1 o'clock. This is what is expected, but no protected time for research during the day. And of course, a methodology expert, they have methodology knowledge, but they actually don't have clinical experience. However, if you look at the 3 persons and you put together, everything is there what need to be successful. If you watch the video, so first we teach them, the students, and after there was in the table always a biostatistician, a clinical expert, and the students. And this is the way how you can speed up the whole processes. So the new structure is that you need a center facility called Center for Translational Medicine, where the clinician, the students, and the methodology expert can sit down, and they need to sit to one table. That's so easy. However, the leaders needs to change. And for example, now in the US, if you look at the good clinicians, they work only 1 or 2 days in a clinic and 3 days protected time for research. I don't say that we should start with 3 days. It wouldn't be feasible. But starting 1 day, all clinicians should get 1 research day. And they would change the whole thinking of their thing. And how the other countries see these things. Now I was at the University of Southern California at Los Angeles. They are one of the most innovative universities in the US. In the last 20 years, they had 4 Nobel laureates. So I think the University of Rijeka and Pécs would be happy to have a Nobel laureate every 5 years. So they are quite good one. And they have actually 2 deans for every faculties. 1 dean is responsible for running the system, and 1 dean is responsible to bring new educational system to the field. And they found this program very unique. So from this year, September, they will send students, so they will make the application process in Los Angeles. And after to this 1-year course, they will send the students to our course. So actually our vision is that we need, of course, a headquarter, for example, in Hungary. We try to involve all universities to the whole system. And especially we have also in Târgu Mureș in Marosvásárhelyen University where they teach Hungarian. We need a center database, a center IT system, and we need, of course, like grants. And in the university level, you need the students, you need these investigators, clinicians, students, methodology experts, trias. You need also like postgraduate education. And of course, you need to involve the hospitals, actually the system. And this will generate success at all levels, because this will, you will have better healthcare, you will have competitive science, academic degrees, pharma industry, education, international visibility, and more jobs. And the main important, you need to give only a starting funding, because After that, this will fund the system themselves, because if you look at the cheaper healthcare and also the clinical trials and the education, for example, no US students will come and they will pay $20,000 tuition fee a year. So after that, if you start building up the system, after that the whole system will run actually itself. However, of course, what is needed for doing this, you need a very good young people also in scientific activity. So we built up another program for the system. So we wanted to have really understand what you need in science. And what we had very good contacts with Nobel laureates, and the secret is very easy. You need only two things for science.
Science is an enterprise that relies upon young people and their ideas, you know, and science will stop if we can't motivate young people to move into science.
So very easy, you need young people. So we applied for grants by the Ministry of Education in Hungary, and we got the money doing this. So we implement the scientific activity to secondary school level. So the whole program means that we involve 100 biology teachers at secondary school level, and we teach them to teach science. We have more than 1,000 secondary school students involved in the program. And we have also at the universities mentors and students. So we have two major laboratories for secondary school students in Szeged and Hódmezővásárhely. And we also have 12 laboratories for secondary school students in a nationwide system, where they got actually laboratory place for doing science at the age of 16, 17, and 18. And currently, more than 123 schools and 1,000 secondary school students involved in the system. So this is how, for the future, we try to prepare ourselves for a better healthcare. But of course, if you do the way which didn't work and you continue it, you will not move into the 21st century. So, and the whole program means in Hungary that we also try to have partners from outside countries, and currently we have only 2 universities actually the system. So we have, of course, plenty of collaborators also from Europe and also from North America. We have currently 11 Nobel laureates visited us within the last 5 years, and all of them gave more than 20 talks to the secondary school students. Of course, now we don't have too much time to listen about the whole program, but what should we do? And this is what we suggest for the Hungarian politicians, to build up a national program. Actually, the translational medicine developed in Pécs. We would like to implement it for the all part actually in Hungary. And we would like to involve all the hospitals in Hungary to the systems. And also for the secondary school programs, to keep up the feasibility, we also need a national program at secondary school level. Currently, we have the secondary schools involved. We need to implement this kind of mentorship program also to the universities. So this is like a life for a young people from 2020. First, we need to sensitize young people at secondary school level for science. They either start medical school or biology. If they become to be a physician, they need a separate program to teach them the best methodology, and they can go to be a basic scientist. So this structure uniquely can help us to prepare ourselves. So the final messages of this talk is quality patient care cannot be achieved without science. Science must be taken to hospital level. A new teaching methodology needs to be in translational medicine. The work assignment in patient care needs to be reorganized. Science education in physiology and medicine must start at secondary school level. So actually this is the way we believe, and also the European Academy believe, that it's very much important to implement to the system to elevate the level of healthcare in every subject. So thank you very much for your attention. And And of course, if you have any question, I am more than happy to answer it. Go on. Questions?
So you include a lot of young people in the system, and I really think that this is something fantastic, and we are trying to do this also in a field of evidence-based medicine, but this what you have is really organized by European projects and by financing from other countries. So it is, I think, maybe the best organized program of that type in a whole Eastern Europe. No?
Yeah, I think you need, if you would like to have benefits, you need to change the system. And you need to change slowly everything at the same time. So, for example, until a clinical doctor have no protected time for research, the system will not work. Because who will deal with the students? The students going to a clinician's, wait, I need to deal with an endoscopy, wait by tomorrow because I need to see the patient. So no time. So you need dedicated time for that. So for example, what I suggested also in the office here, that we are very happy to have students also in Page from September. We can teach, and biostatisticians, we can teach this whole kind of new models for them. And after, it should be interdisciplinary unit with biostatisticians, IT persons, data managers, but this is affordable. And after this kind of new education system, within 4 years, we had 10 times more articles than before. And we published altogether before 10 impact factors, now 270. So within 4 years, annually 200,000 euros changed everything. So not money is the fact which is definitely needing. Rethink about the model. People usually, especially in Eastern and Central Europe, in Hungary as well, everyone would like to have better healthcare. Everyone would like to have more papers. Everyone would like to have better degrees. But we don't want to change our system. We have been running this system for 40 years. Who is this guy who would like to change it? First, yeah, it's not too many currently because at the university education is not implemented. For example, I just say it's also difficult in Page because it still couldn't go into the regular medical education because they have a common amount of education hours. And for example, if this should go into the medical curriculum, maybe the anatomy should be shorter, physiology, biochemistry should be shorter, but they are fighting for a lot that we need to teach this, we need to teach this, we need to teach this. So it was impossible to put it to a medical curriculum. So this is why we put this additional 12 months. But these young ones, most of them came from Budapest, Szeged, Debrecen, from other towns to learn this. So now we are going around in Hungary with this presentation as well, and we try to accommodate, and we are quite successful. So in Hungary we have PhD studentship and residency, and none of the universities can fill up the places because they are going away. Here we had much more youngsters than we could have, so, and this number will elevate from September. So I believe that if we go to the secondary school level also, and we go to the university level, I think young people will understand that actually without understanding the scientific benefits, they can't be a good doctor.
Okay, I will now give a last question to them. So who of you is interested to doing 25% of your working time science?
it's a good start.
It's a good start. So we will continue to work with them. Some of them are still included in scientific work. So I think that we should start work with them. Some of them are at the moment in this job, but maybe there are some who are
Of course, Rome was.
affected also
Yeah.
with your lecture.
Of course, Rome was not built up within one day, so of course more time is needed to get this knowledge. But for example, at the Heimpál Children's Hospital, we had the health secretary of the country who is the leading, and they had 57 residents, so he decided that every year he sent 5 residents, and within 10 years all the doctors he will re-educate, for example, this program. So we are quite happy seeing that something started.
Okay, so thank you once again. Please.
Thank you, and as I mentioned, and we will send it out if somebody is interested in coming to Page for a fellowship for a short period. We are more than happy to get them, and they can come home, bring back the knowledge and implement it here. So we are happy to have anybody from here.
Thank you very much, and we can organize this among those people who are interested.